Hello Heidelberg, and hello Glasgow. We don't have a huge amount of time to get through what I'd like to talk about today, so we're going to real quickly go through the manly men of the Imperium, the semiotics of tabletop play. We'll drop by the Oriental decadence of the Eldar and the techno-Orientalism of the Tau, drop by briefly what is anecdotally called the Girls' Army, and then I'm going to show you a spreadsheet. Maybe we'll have some time to mourn the fact I didn't talk about orcs. I think that would be a great topic for next year. Let's see if we get there. What does it mean to be a human? Philosophers, political scientists, biologists, and poets struggled with this idea for millennia. But I know. I'll tell you what it means. It means you're a man. Saddle up, boys, because men have jobs to do, and our job is war. To put it pretty bluntly, to be within the Imperium of Man and Warhammer 40k is to be a man. It's also to be a soldier. I don't mean to say you're a man in a biological sense. You can be of the female sex or no sex at all, and still be considered fairly masculine. Despite continuing challenges to the status quo, the perceived default state for the player of war games, previously digital games, though this has been challenged as research has continued to develop, it's still masculine, just like it is for the soldier. This hypermasculinity may be satirical, but the tabletop franchise sure hasn't been interested in challenging it. Under this sort of prescribed male gaze through which we see Warhammer, the irrelevance of gender, the fact that you can be an Imperial Guard and be named Vasquez, for instance, really underlies the assumed norm here. So if we want to talk about culture, we've got some initial difficulties to get through. Most of all, that Games Workshop lore is pretty self-consciously unreliable. Primary sources within canon are propagandistic, degraded by time and the retelling, censored, embellished. Within the universe, all sources are, to an extent, unreliable. With over 10 editions of gameplay and hundreds of primary sources across arguably even more authors, the challenge to remain internally coherent while still leaving space for creative play is solved with ambiguity. 40k lore under this lens isn't contradictory, it's mythic. If you're interested in canonicity within 40k, Chris Porter's Excommunicate Traitoris from last year is a fantastic place to start. I know Chris is here in the conference, so hi Chris if you're rewatching this. Oh, it's also a fantastic thumb on the scale towards realism. A piece of lore that breaks tone or somehow manages to threaten the universe's coherence can be rejected as the byproduct of a story that grew in the telling. Which is interesting, but leaves us in a little bit of hot water. If we want to talk about tabletop gameplay with any authority, where can we look? First of all, we can look towards the codices. There have been at least 10 editions of 40k with occasional updates between, the most recent always assumed to supersede the last. This is useful until it is overwritten. We will be using these, though, because they are gameplay relevant. Secondly, we can look at the secondary materials, games, novels, animations, and to an extent fan lore. This is an absolute wealth of information, and without a doubt, the most contradictory. We'll probably give this some space. Finally, and perhaps most relevant for gameplay semiotics, we can look at the models. The models are the one place where canonicity in a tabletop game can interfere with your play. If your models look too different, if you've modeled the wrong size or used an unpermitted sculpt, you may not be permitted to play in sanctioned spaces. Models of sculptural art objects also function a little differently from written lore. A successful model needs to satisfy 4 conditions listed here. Thanks to Arnie Campbell for this. It must indicate the model's purposes or capacities. It must be recognizable, preferably from about 2 meters away at an 88mm scale. It must communicate its relationship with the rest of the world, in our case, its faction alliance, and it must be aesthetically interesting. Okay, it's a lot to start with. Back to our human question, how do you know within a universe where transhumanism runs rife that you are a human? According to Stuart Hall, 1996, you are human, in short, because you are not something else. Likewise, you are male because you are not female. This concept of self-identification is constantly being refined when you run into something else that you are not. What are you, then? And if you're not a man, what could you be? So, I'd like to start with an older story here. It is the turn of the millennium. The greatest empire, perhaps the greatest we will ever see, lives under the eye of a vibrant pantheon. They use technology we have yet to recover. They build roads still in use 1,000 years later. but in their glory they grow complacent, decadent, effeminate. In this moment of moral weakness, a god is birthed in the people's new image. This is the myth of the fall of Rome, and this is also the myth of the fall of the Eldari, the Warhammer elves, James. The Eldari version might embellish a little bit, but it shares the same roots. Crediting the whole of the fall of Rome to cultural degeneracy and perversion, while it still persists in modern political discourse, is generally considered a fringe theory and dismissed. Criticisms of Roman aristocratic decadence and effeminacy, on the other hand, a lack of masculine Roman values, is a narrative that begins with the turn of the millennium Roman historiographers Livy and Tacitus. It fell out of favor on the end of the 19th century, leaving us with, give or take, around 2,000 years of that narrative surrounding a key touchstone in how the English understand their mythic pasts. That a Rome already existed, and that it fell is an existentially frightening premise for an imperium that speaks pidgin Latin and looks like, well, this. Okay, if this is what a man looks like, what do these proto-Romans look like? In short, they're androgynous. In fact, building a non-character Eldar model for tabletop, the only appreciable difference between a male and female coded sculpt is the chest piece, a modularity that means the rest of the sculpt must be legible to an audience, remember, from about 2 meters away, as either male or female. This leaves the gendered semiotics of the model in a pretty ambivalent place. Male is our baseline, and we can mark it as female otherwise if we would like. As a result, without seeing the model's secondary sexual characteristics, you can't tell. Elves are lithe and slender, with form-fitting bodysuits, regardless of sex. This type of modularity, interchangeable parts set on sprues, is the current Games Workshop standard for modeling alternatives. Applying that modularity to the Eldar began all the way in 3rd edition with their Guardian release, shown here. These are some 1999 3rd edition First Codex. The red circle models are women, complete with breastplate. Within this structure, gender is somewhat literally contained within the chest. That might sound a little glib. Surely there's more to the Eldari, a species with a gendered war god and a gendered healing goddess, than what armor they wear. But on the tabletop, that's all you get, and armor is a military expression of how the Eldari perform gender transgression. The craftword autarch, shown up here in red, is a warlord model. Within their codex, we learn that to qualify as an autarch, one must master all of the craftworld's paths, including the all-female modeled howling banshee type. Autarchs can have flat chests too, so we can say that the male-coded sculpts have spent at least a century within codex lore, living as a woman. This is codex legal, data sheet level power derived from an ambiguous gender space. The sort of gender ambivalence and transgression are modeled in the two gods the Eldar have made in their own image, the synthetic deities that are most of what remains of that vibrant pantheon mentioned earlier. Slaanesh, the Dark Prince that was born at the Fall, presents as a creature beautiful, monstrous, and bigendered, one breast and one peck. In Slaanesh's case, this is an expression of the grotesque. Slaanesh rules lust and desire, and her demon armies present in similarly bigendered and thus perverse bodies. The Eldari also refer to the Dark Prince as she who thirsts, and refer to her with feminine pronouns. It's a subtle but striking manifestation of an alien idea of what Judith Butler calls the surface politics of the body. It can't just mean perversity, though. The Eldari brought forth another synthetic god, the Incarn, a manifestation of their death god, the other purple model on the screen. The Incarn's model performs the same sort of breastplate semiotics as Slaanesh. It's also bigendered. From this, we could suppose, if we wanted, that the Eldar have a bigendered view of themselves. Elves contain masculine and feminine in equal parts. Let's visit another Xeno real fast, otherwise I'll talk about elves all day. Welcome to the Tau. Narratives about yellow peril future started cropping up in the early 20th century, drawing on immigration anxieties in the United States. Over in England, Sax Rohmer introduced the evil doctor Fu Manchu in 1913, a character with shocking staying power and perhaps our first connection between the terrifying Asian and advanced sciences, as opposed to the terrifying Asian and evil magic. Sadian Orientalism positions the Orient, those from the East, or perhaps the eastern reaches of the galaxy, as primitive, sexualized, and in need of a good civilizing. The Tau of the Tau Empire certainly are not primitive, not sexualized, and barely have a signature in the warp at all. Magic is an alien force to them. Thankfully, racism is a field rife with innovation. Techno-Orientalism came to us in the 80s. The economic and technological boom that Asia-Pacific, specifically Japan, began, it sparked a whole new wave of economic and racial insecurities as once securely dominant economic powers were menaced by Japanese computers, media, and vehicles. Enter cyberpunk, and enter the Tau. This upstart young empire's rapid technological progress, stark against the stagnation of the Imperium and success as an assimilationist empire, does not threaten the empire of man in an immediate physical way, but they may still sit poised to dominate, to drag the empire into their Zeto-laden, religiously lax future. The threat of the Tau, one might say, is the threat of the reversal of the Orientalist subject-object dichotomy, that others may look upon us as we once looked upon them. To do some foundational work for calling the Tau Orientalist in nature. As Campbell states, it's rare that Warhammer pulls all of its cultural signifiers from a single or even a more restrained cultural source, but here we have David Gallagher's drawing of the Tau Ethereal. To the best of my knowledge, this is concept art from 3rd E before the Tau were released. Next to him, we have Commander Farsight in his Japanese Gundam suit, wielding a katana, standing on terrain that recalls the ink/floral artwork of Miyamoto Musashi. Sadian Orientalism sets the Orient as the feminine as a counterpoint to the masculine Occident, in our case the Imperium. This poses a challenge to our reading of the Tau. On a biological level, the Tau are racialized but not gendered. Techno-Orientalism conflates the Asian body, often but not exclusively female, with the object or machine. The Tau is the crisis suit, and the crisis suit is property. Tau models, like the Eldar, are differentiated into male and female by a single sculpt piece, in their case the head. The female Tau has a Y-shaped gill, the male an I-shaped one. In practice, though, the majority of Tau models are helmeted. The semiotics of a crisis suit don't really indicate a person at all. It's just an Asian automaton, or a Transformers toy. This suits the Tau notion of individuality. They are a collectivist empire, one whose primary value is unity, another idea often associated with the East. That they would give up a sense of personal need in the name for the greater good, becoming almost eusocial in nature, is another one of those mental existential threats posed to the Imperium. Speaking of eusociality, not all aliens have men and women. Some of them we don't quite know yet. Alina Polyakova in Tyriad Xenobiology last year suggested that the Tyranids might, in fact, reproduce via parthenogenesis. There's no proof of this, but this would mean they are an entirely feminine species. We certainly know about the hive queens and the dominatrixes, who have psychic control over the drones of their army. That is pretty firmly within the realm of speculation. What I can say for certain as a relationship between femininity and the Tyranids is that they are, around here in Glasgow, considered the girls' army, the army that a girl is the most likely to play. Some Reddit sources back this up, but GW not keeping market research makes this pretty hard to prove. This sort of model of Xenos, this goopy, icky, alien and mysterious, makes them creatures of pure reproduction, creatures of pure, untamed, uncivilized nature, that thing which has so often been associated as the feminine. It's also a parallel to the Aliens franchise, classic sci-fi reproductive horror. It's a view of reproduction that situates it as something that the human cannot attain, a kind of adolescent male perspective, if I were to go that far. Sometimes, of course, they look like people. These are the gene stealers, those with alien DNA within them. Sometimes they look like monsters, and sometimes they look like sexy ladies. There's that same fear in the Eldar of cultural degeneracy contained within here, that aliens might be within us and among us, and that sometimes they might be sexy ladies who would like to reproduce with us. Terrifying. As a quick matter of curiosity, because this was the question I received the most while workshopping this idea, here's a breakdown of currently tabletop legal as of the 10th Codex as delineated by Wahapedia, factions sorted by whether or not there are female options for play. You are welcome to and expected to debate this. I'd be happy to hear what you found or know during Q&A. Here's all our female table legal ones. Where possible, I've listed non-characters, because that speaks more to a cultural foundation. Here's all our unplayable women, dominantly Astartes. If you'd like to hear about that debate, that's much longer. Orcs are in here, that's certainly something to debate. And for the ones I simply couldn't tell you one way or the other, we've sorted them here. Of course, I would like people to argue about this. I'd like to get into that uncertainty contained within Warhammer's mythic lore to discuss where women may or may not be, where the feminine may or may not be. But what this makes pretty clear is that as far as gendered sculpts go, the idea of the feminine, is expressed most frequently and thoroughly through our Xenos factions. So, in conclusion, that's where you find women in the Empire. You gotta go be an elf.